everyone, my name is Lynn Fang and we are here at the EcoFarm today. Voila! The EcoFarm stands for Ecological and Community-Oriented Farming and Resource Management, and it's a model that we're building out, a pilot site in Pomona where we're at right now. And it's basically an integrated community compost urban farming model where we're engaged in kind of whole farm ecology. So we're not doing individual plots in our community garden model, but we're inviting community members to collectively participate in the design and management of the site. And so that's what we have here. You'll see some different kind of soil and growing patches, and we'll get to visit each of them and talk about them in a little bit. So today we're focusing all about soil health, and so EcoFarm is all about soil health. And I would love to bore you with a complete introduction to soil science class, but to spare you from that, we'll just talk about some of the key elements that make your soil healthy and successful and absorbing water. So I always like to say organic matter is kind of the #1 key to building soil health. And so organic matter is anything that comes from a plant or animal that's now in decay. All of this stuff that has fallen from the tree nearby, the mulch, the wood chips, the decaying blossoms and seeds, all of that is going to go through a process called decomposition and be transformed into soil and feed the soil biology, the soil food web, which provides all of the benefits and functions that we want from our soil. So the soil food web is all of our favorite bacteria, fungi, nematodes, protozoa, microarthropods. They're chomping at the wood chips and releasing carbon dioxide, generating plant available nutrients, and also building humus, which is the dark chocolatey material. It's the end product of decomposition. So decomposition, this is the process that we're working with, regardless of whether we're doing lasagna mulching or composting. So we're going to walk through some different soil building techniques today. One is lasagna mulching. There's another technique called hugelkultur, which we have not yet built up here at this site yet, but then we're going to look at our hot composting process. So one of the easiest things you could do is lasagna mulching if you're starting a garden, or especially if you want to convert your lawn. Lasagna mulching is a great no-dig way to convert your lawn. There's no reason to have to work hard to dig out your grass. All you have to do is put down cardboard, put down wood chips, a little bit of manure, a little bit more wood chips, and you're good to go. And it's a very basic lasagna mulching method, and that works very well. And you can pretty much plant directly in that. It'll be a little bit more variable in the first year, but then after the first year, the soil will be really nice and it'll get really stable and you'll get really productive results from it. And then if you want to plant directly in that, to do like a vegetable bed, we do like 3 to 6 inches of compost on top to do kind of the pure vegetable bed planting. And we practice no-till gardening and farming techniques, so I'm all about no-till for soil health, because when you till, even with a broad fork and you're raking up the soil, you're really disturbing the structure and the soil biology. All of those fungi and mycelium and bacteria and nematodes that have worked so hard to build their society is now getting all ripped up and turned up by your tillage activities. And so now they have to rebuild their whole worlds, the whole soil structure, and it's very damaging in the long run. And so we practice no-till techniques. I advocate for no tilling at all. Some people want a rototill in the beginning, and I think that that's not necessary. So lasagna mulch is really all you need. That really builds up the soil biology. For the no-till, once your vegetables are done, I just cut them off at the surface. You can leave the roots in to decompose, and then that's it. You add a little bit more compost, and then you can grow your new bed again. So there's no reason to disturb the soil. You do need to be making a lot of compost to do this no-till kind of gardening and farming technique. But I highly recommend that, to be making lots of compost and not tilling your soil, and making sure it's really healthy. So some of the benefits from doing these processes, like lasagna mulching, ensuring there's always like wood chips and mulch on your soil, is that you get to conserve water, less moisture is evaporated in these processes. You get to improve the soil structure because of the biological activity, and so you get to improve your ability to filter in and soak in and hold on to water, and so you can reduce your irrigation demand that way. It can sequester carbon in the soil when you build up the health and biology and ecology of the soil. So you can turn your soil into a carbon sink as well. All sorts of other benefits. You can suppress disease. With a vibrant biology, you're more likely to get plant disease suppression, so your plants will be healthier overall. You can sequester heavy metals with humus. So when your compost is finished, it's more likely to sequester heavy metals. So it can be used in bioremediation as well. It's habitat for biology. Aggregate stability is a major indicator of the soil structural strength. So that's when the soil particles kind of clump together because of the biology. And then that really helps to resist erosion. So all of these practices really help to build our soil strength, and we don't have to work as hard. We let the soil microbes do the work for us to build healthy and strong soils that provide a lot of nutrients for all the vegetables that we need to grow. So do we want to walk down a little bit and check out some of these lasagna mulch beds? So we can check this out. You can see we've already mulched the entire site. So this site was a vacant lot when we got started. So nothing was here. It was compacted soil. The soil's very hard at that point. And so we covered it all up with mulch. So there's wood chips everywhere. This is a lasagna mulch patch that we built up for our food forest. And on top of the wood chips, we have manure. So we have a thick layer of wood chips and manure here. And then on top of the manure, we have finished compost. And then we planted cover crops in here. And there's some fruit trees around as well. And then this section here, we're playing around with some keyhole garden bed designs, and also use like a layered mulching method. So again, we have wood chips and manure, and we have some soil that we dug up from on site from our pond, which is a heart shape. There's roots in it too, so I like to call it the pond of deep-rooted love. So we have some soil from there here, and then on top is our finished compost that we made on site. And we're planting some Three Sisters in here, so we've got some corn and beans going already, and we're putting in squash in a second. And we'll be filling in the other beds with other summer veggies. So for the lasagna mulching technique, you can pretty much plant right away in it. We didn't wait very long for ours, so we pretty much just planted right away in it. You can see there's some fruit trees in our lasagna mulch as well. So yeah, you can feel free to plant directly in it. What really helps with that is making sure that your top layer is finished compost, especially if you're planting like vegetables or fruit trees or things like that. These are our intensive production vegetable beds. So they're built in that same kind of process, the lasagna mulch process. of a layer of mulch, manure, and then the top is like 3 to 6 inches of finished compost in all of these vegetable beds. And we pretty much put our vegetable seedlings directly in there. We've got our drip irrigation hooked up. And that's it. We don't amend anymore. You could if you wanted to. There's other amendments you can use as well. But we just use this method, and that works pretty well for us. So you can see that things are just starting to get growing. But once kind of the season, once they've all kind of grown and finished through the season, again, I said we'll just kind of cut down the surface. We'll kind of leave the roots in to decompose. And that's kind of our no-till method. And then we'll add more compost on top to grow the next cycle. So that's our intensive vegetable production. And so when I talk about some of these different soil building methods, so lasagna mulching is going to be slow. If you just have carbon or wood chips, it's going to be a slow process. So if you have a little bit of nitrogen, which is from the manure, or if you have extra leafy wood chips, that can act as a little bit of a nitrogen also. That'll help to speed up the decomposition a little bit more, and it also helps to prevent this issue of nitrogen stealing from other plants nearby. So if you just add a little bit of nitrogen to your mulch mix, then you won't get that nitrogen stealing phenomenon. So that's kind of a slow and cold process, whereas if you tweak that C to N ratio, you can speed up that decomposition and get into hot composting. And so the hot composting is basically engineering all of those variables of decomposition, so you can have that decomposition happen as fast as possible. And that generates heat. You know, you're optimizing your C to N ratio, and so then it's hot, and then it gets to like 130 to 150 degrees. That's really great for pathogen reduction. And then you're releasing heat, and if you're turning all the time, like, you can get your compost in about 3 months finished. Our process is like 3 to 6 months to finish compost. We're turning a little bit less here. So we can go check out the hot composting process. We are picking up food scraps from local businesses through our pilot bike hauling program. So we got a lovely donation from LA Compost of a bike trailer. And so Pomona's quite flat, so we're able to go and bike around to local businesses and such to pick up food scraps and brew waste and things like that.
Here for some questions.
Okay.
Question, what if ground is compacted from people working the land prior to sheet mulching?
Okay, so we have a question of what if the ground is compacted prior to sheet mulching? So that's the whole point for sheet mulching, is to kind of revitalize compacted soil. And then so if you have a soil texture issue too, like too much clay or too much sand with sheet mulching and organic matter. So any of those situations where you have an extreme kind of soil situation, it's too compact, too clay, too sandy, that can be alleviated with organic matter. So doing the sheet mulching process helps to kind of fluff up and bring life to the soil, like no matter what state it's in.
Water runoff from elevated beds, what's the concern about that?
So another question is, what do you do about water runoff from elevated beds? So that's a great question. So yeah, there's like random slopes down our bed sides. Some different techniques people have used, is to actually do sunken beds. So like at my house, we're trying that out, where the beds are actually dug in and then the walkways are above, and so that helps to reduce your runoff. For us, we're planting kind of herbs and veggies and flowers at the ends and edges of the beds. So with the runoff, we're trying to catch that and trying trying to utilize that to grow flowers and herbs at the edges of the beds. That also contributes to biodiversity and attracting pollinators. So it contributes to the biodiversity of the system.
Can they use leaves instead of wood chips? And what's the concern of using wood chips from like Home Depot where there's dyes and stuff?
So the question is, can you use leaves instead of wood chips? For carbon materials, like dry leaves are another carbon material that are really great. They do break down a little bit differently than wood chips. Wood chips are really incredible because they have this property, especially in composting, to absorb and neutralize odors. They're also like a hardy carbon, and so they'll kind of provide a long-term resource in the soil, and they also provide like structural support as well. So they have, wood chips have different kind of properties and roles to play. So I would say that they're more of a long-term structural kind of carbon. Dry leaves are going to break down a little bit more quickly. They're less dense, they're smaller particle size. So if you have a little bit more water, they may get compacted, or which means they'll block the airflow. They could get smelly. So those are some concerns with just using dry leaves over wood chips.
How would you plant the seeds in lasagna mulch? Do you embed it, put it directly on top?
For planting seeds in lasagna mulch, I would put some compost, so put like a couple inches of compost on top, and then plant directly in the compost, and you should be good.
There's a concern about pathogens such as salmonella. Can those pathogens be taken up through roots?
Those pathogens, they're not taken up through the roots that way. They're going to be around. So there are going to be, there's pathogens in our environment. They're in our microbiome. So they are present in the wood chips. The decomposition process and composting is going to attract a wider abundance and variety and diversity of microbiome. And so that will keep your pathogens at bay. If you're very sensitive to these things, then you'll want to wear like a dust mask when you're working with wood chips or anything like that.
When it comes to soil amendments, manure and compost, are they interchangeable, or do you need them for specific properties? Should I be putting manure in my compost mix?
Question about manure and compost, are they different, and how should we use them differently? So they are different. Manure, so an aged manure that has just kind of been sitting around for a long time is going to be more like a finished compost, but it's still not the same thing. And the difference is your finished compost that's made really well is going to have consistent results. So you're going to grow and germinate things consistently. The manure is going to be more variable because it's not fully composted. It'll still work. You'll probably be okay. You'll still get to grow a lot of stuff, but you'll have more variability with it. So
we want to see the layering process and different stages of compost piles, which I think is a good transition.
Okay. So yeah, let's go check out our composting process. EcoFarm. She's a superstar farmer, eco-farmer. She's been managing our compost, and she's got a awesome compost pile going. Do you want to tell us about the process?
Yeah, so this is a brand new pile. I started with a layer of wood chips underneath just to kind of hold everything and keep too much liquids from leaching out. And then all of these bins here have food waste in them. So food waste from, so scraps from restaurants that we pick up. Some of these have stuff from the farmer's market that we saved as well. And then these have some coffee grounds in here. And then sometimes we bring stuff from our homes too, as well to compost. And then lastly, this is spent grain from a local brewery. So I just do sort of layers of each thing. I started with a layer of vegetable scraps, and then I'm gonna sprinkle some of this spent grain on top. And then I'll probably do some coffee grounds on top of that. Top it off with manure and wood chips. And then I'll do the whole thing again. Do another bit of food waste, some more grain, coffee grounds, and then another cap with manure and wood chips. And then we'll do this until the piles are about this big. We keep them pretty small here. I like them to keep them pretty small here because we move them all by hand, and it's a lot more manageable to move one small pile a week than to move one very large pile once a month or something like that. So I like the small pile setup better for just more efficient hand work.
Awesome, thank you.
Can you show us some of the current ones? Open them up.
Yeah, is there a recent pile that you built recently that you can open up and check out?
So I added to this one just to finish it off this morning. So there would be fresh things there. But it was initially started last week, so maybe you get some nice layers of
Yeah.
these.
Do you want to check that one out?
And that one is like or 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago?
Go ahead.
So this pile's from 2 weeks ago, and you can see it's already breaking down very nicely. There's quite a bit of heat coming through. Yeah, so a lot of the fresh food waste is already broken down. So it's quite a fast process. Yeah, so we have developed our process to kind of really layer these different elements quite specifically based on their like carbon and nitrogen ratio. So the brewery waste is a high nitrogen material, and the coffee grounds are a high nitrogen material. The manure is a high nitrogen material. So we are loading up. We're getting a lot of nitrogen now, and actually there's like too much. Like the local brewer, Homage, has like a ton of brewery waste, so that's like even too much for us. So we've been dropping it off at other urban farm sites as well. But that's what allows us to get our temperatures up to 130 to 150 degrees. And so we're able to do our hot compost process because of all of these high nitrogen materials. We're lucky that we have access to manure out here. There's a goat farm not far away that drops off manure here sometimes. And then there's plenty of horse ranches around too that we get manure from as well. So that's a little bit about our hot compost process. It's the same thing, tweaking the C/N variables, making sure our piles are moist. That gets them up to the hot temperature. That way we know we're killing our pathogens. So that's a little bit about our process.
Let's do more questions. Thank you. Question around chemically treated wood chips from Home Depot. Is that okay to use? Any
So
harm
the
to
question
this?
is on chemically treated wood chips from Home Depot. I always recommend against that because those are usually like sterilized, and so that kills off your beneficial bacteria. So you really want the fresh tree trimmings. So if there's a mulch pickup site in your city, or if you can contact a local tree trimmer to drop off a load, like that's really ideal. There's also a website called chipdrop.com to request wood chip loads delivery.
How do you limit pests around the compost pile?
The question is, how do you deal with pests around the compost pile? So some of the common pests that show up are like cockroaches and ants. So if there's cockroaches and ants in your neighborhood, like it's gonna be hard to get rid of them. They're probably not gonna leave 100%, but generally speaking, if your pile is too dry, you're gonna get a lot more ants and a lot more cockroaches. So you wanna make sure your pile is in a shady spot, that it stays moist. You might still see some of those guys, but there'll be a lot less of them if it's very moist. The other thing too with cockroaches, they seem to like kind of the dark corner, so actually like trying the freestanding pile might be better for cockroaches.
Should I use pipes to aerate the compost piles like the PVC ones?
There's a question about using pipes to aerate the compost. Yeah, you can totally do that. There's drainage pipes you can get from Home Depot that are big and they have like holes drilled in them, and they will help to add passive aeration to your compost. So if you don't want to spend that labor turning your pile, then yeah, I would recommend getting a passive aeration tube, and that'll help facilitate your aeration process. Otherwise, as long as you can turn your pile like, you know, one to three times, you know, in its life cycle, like I think that's fine.
What are food alternatives to coffee grounds or spent brewery?
So question is alternatives to coffee grounds or spent brewery grains. So these are a class of feedstock materials that I like to call high nitrogen activators. So these are extra high nitrogen materials. They will really kickstart and add heat to your compost. So those are coffee grounds, brewery waste, and manures. So like goat, horse, cow manures, chicken manure, all of that will add heat to your compost pile. So in terms of that high nitrogen functionality, those are the feedstock materials that really perform that function. So if you don't have coffee grounds or brewery waste, then you should use manure. So if you don't have manure, then you should use coffee grounds or brewery waste.
Thoughts on 3-bin systems and typical backyard city bins and residential compost bins?
So the question is, what are my thoughts on backyard bins versus or 3-bin systems? I think the bin systems, like I like freestanding piles because they're more flexible and adaptable. Like if you want to process a lot more waste, it's easier to kind of grow the pile size. And if you want to move it, it's pretty easy to move piles around. I don't know, it's a little bit more work to like move bins around and stuff. But if you have a small system, like an at-home system, I think the bins are fine. I always advocate for having at least 2 bins. So if you're gonna go with a backyard bin system, I always advocate for a 2-bin system. So you have one that's your add to pile. So you add your fresh material, fresh food waste into that pile. And then the other bin is like a maturation bin. So you're not adding fresh food waste in there. And you're just allowing the compost to cure, essentially.
Question is pros and cons of the following order is if you did mulch and then compost versus compost and then mulch.
So the question was the order of the mulch layering. Like, can you do the mulch or the compost on top of mulch versus compost under the mulch? So the way I think about that is like, the mulch is fresh. What are you trying to plant? If you're trying to plant like vegetables, they really are gonna want to be in compost. So they might be more flexible, like you might be able to play around with that order. But generally speaking, if you're trying to plant right away, I would put the compost on top of the mulch, because the compost is going to be your most finished material. So you want to plant right away in that most finished material. For things like fruit trees and stuff, that's where it's like, you know, you can plant that in the mulch and that's fine, with the compost underneath. So, awesome. Thank you guys so much for this time, and I hope you're inspired to turbocharge your soil.